Have you ever been on like a cross-country flight and you look out the window and it just feels like you're completely suspended in the air?
Oh, yeah, like you're just hanging there.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, you are traveling at what, 500 miles an hour? The engines are burning thousands of gallons of fuel. There's this massive, forceful forward momentum happening.
Right.
But because you're up above the clouds and you don't have any trees or buildings zipping past to give you, a visual reference point, your brain tells you that you are standing perfectly still. You basically feel like you're getting absolutely nowhere.
It is a profound sensory trick. I mean, you're making incredible progress, but you're experiencing a complete deprivation of visual feedback. So
Yeah.
your mind just starts playing tricks on you, making you question the value of the entire journey.
And that psychological trick, that feeling of being stuck in the void despite doing all the work, that actually brings us to the core of today's mission. So, welcome back to the deep dive.
It's good to be here.
For today's mission, we are bringing you a special Transformation Talks, which is an After the Amen deep dive into the profound messages coming out of Transformation Ministries.
Oh, this is a really good one today.
It is. But before we jump into the deep end, do make sure to hit that subscribe button to the channel so you never miss these insights. So today, we're taking a magnifying glass to a wildly resonant sermon from Pastor Jeffrey West,
Yeah.
and it is appropriately titled, Don't Quit in the Middle. You're halfway there.
You know, we live in a culture that just loves to throw parades for the starting line and the finish line.
Oh, 100%.
Right. Like we celebrate the courage it takes to launch a new business or the euphoria of walking down the aisle. And of course, we pop champagne when the final mortgage payment is made.
Yeah, the big milestone.
Exactly. But Pastor West is isolating the phase that actually determines human success, and that is the middle. It is the most dangerous, intensely frustrating place to be in your faith, your career, or, your relationships.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the way the source material defines the mechanics of the middle, it fundamentally shifts how we should view our daily responsibilities.
It really does.
Pastor West points out that starting something is, well, it's relatively cheap. The real cost, the agonizing, back-breaking part of any endeavor is the maintenance.
Yes, the maintenance.
He uses some very tangible examples. I mean, you can get approved for a car loan, sign the papers for a house, or say, I do at the altar. Those are singular events.
Right.
But the daily maintenance of that vehicle, the unexpected plumbing catastrophes in the house, the emotional labor of sustaining a marriage for decades, that is where the actual cost of the commitment comes due.
What's fascinating here is how that modern reality maps so perfectly onto ancient psychological and spiritual patterns.
How so?
Well, the sermon grounds this in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 8, which states that the end of a thing is better than its beginning. When you break down the neurology and the theology of that middle phase, you see a complete convergence. The middle is uniquely taxing because it acts as, like, a dopamine desert.
A dopamine desert. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, because in the beginning, you get a massive neurochemical rush of excitement, the novelty of the new project, and at the end, you get the reward. But the middle requires you to operate entirely without that chemical motivation.
Wow. So it's all discipline and no reward?
Exactly.
And the sermon describes this vividly. You are praying, but you aren't seeing the results yet. You're walking the walk, holding your tongue, doing all the right things, but there is zero physical manifestation of your effort.
Right, not at all.
It's basically the spiritual equivalent of pouring water into a bucket that you suspect has a hole in it. You are putting in maximum effort for zero visible return.
And this raises an important question about identity and growth, because in that void, when the initial excitement has evaporated and the external pressure is peaking, we experience a profound sense of awkwardness.
Yeah, awkwardness is a great word for it.
Because we don't feel like the person who started, but we haven't really become the person at the finish line yet either.
And that awkwardness is just beautifully illustrated by Pastor West's analogy of growing pains.
Oh, I love this part.
Right. He compares being in this middle phase to a toddler going through a massive developmental leap. If you've ever watched a child hit a growth spurt, it's chaotic.
Complete chaos.
Suddenly, they don't fit in their old clothes. They start pushing the bottle away because they inherently know they need solid food, but they don't quite know how to use a spoon yet.
Yeah.
So they're like yanking on the heavy refrigerator door or trying to reach the stove knobs because they have this innate drive to be self-sufficient.
They're mirroring the adults around them. They're attempting to step into a completely new, elevated identity. But because they lack the physical capacity and really the permission to fully execute that new identity, they just end up making a massive mess on the kitchen floor.
Right.
It looks like a disaster, but it is actually a totally necessary developmental milestone.
But let me stop you right there, because I have to play devil's advocate for the listener who is, sitting in that mess right now.
Okay, go for it.
If I am in that awkward phase, struggling with a metaphorical heavy fridge, making mistakes, and seeing absolutely zero visible results from my efforts, how do I objectively know I haven't just taken a completely wrong turn?
That's a very fair question.
Because when you are in the thick of it, my brain interprets the discomfort of shedding an old skin as a giant red flag that's just screaming failure.
And that is the crux of the psychological trap. You feel like you're failing because the metrics of success have temporarily vanished. But Pastor West introduces a massive paradigm shift here.
Which is?
Delay is not denial. Delay is development.
Oh, wow.
The sheer fact that you are currently experiencing the heavy, unglamorous pressure of the middle is undeniable, concrete proof that you have made progress.
Because if you failed...
Right. If you had failed, you wouldn't be dealing with the complexities of the middle. You'd still be stuck at the starting line, or you would have quit completely.
Okay, so the middle literally means you actually survived the beginning.
Precisely. And to anchor this spiritually, the text points to Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, emphasizing the confidence that the good work has already been begun in you by God.
Yeah.
The middle isn't a waiting room where nothing happens. It's an active, profound internal construction zone. You are undergoing cognitive and spiritual resistance training.
Oh, like lifting weights.
Exactly. Just as a muscle only grows when you tear the fibers under heavy weight, your spiritual maturity is forged because the lack of visible reward forces you to rely on deep-rooted discipline rather than superficial motivation.
And the sermon provides some incredibly practical ways to measure this internal construction. It's rarely going to be like cinematic epiphany.
No, rarely.
It shows up in these small, almost invisible victories. Pastor West actually asks the listener to audit their own reactions. Maybe you aren't perfectly patient yet. Maybe you still get frustrated.
Yeah.
But you suddenly realize you aren't as quick to anger as you were, say, 6 months ago.
Or perhaps you find yourself in a heated discussion with a family member, and instead of taking the bait and lashing out the way you historically would, you manage to just take a breath and de-escalate.
Yes. Or it's even more structural than that. You realize you're managing your finances with just a fraction more discipline. You're slowly cutting back on a bad habit, maybe smoking less, or not impulse buying when you're stressed out.
Right.
You might wake up with a fleeting desire to meditate or pray before you immediately grab your phone and start scrolling. I mean, these aren't necessarily final destinations. You haven't arrived at perfection.
Yeah.
But they are undeniable, measurable shifts in your trajectory.
And understanding the underlying mechanism of those small shifts is crucial. According to the source material, these victories are signs of God actively weaning you off your old coping mechanisms.
Preparing you.
Yes, it is a strict preparation phase for greater responsibility. Think about it logically. You cannot handle the vast complexities of a massive harvest if you haven't been meticulously developed during the delay.
That makes so much sense.
The delay is literally building the emotional bandwidth and the spiritual infrastructure required to maintain the blessing once it finally arrives. Without the middle, the blessing would actually crush you.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Because if the middle is this crucial, hyper-productive phase of necessary development, it stands to reason that it's also the phase where you're going to face the most violent opposition.
Oh, absolutely.
The sermon transitions into a deep dive on spiritual warfare, and Pastor West exposes a tactic of the enemy that feels entirely counterintuitive to how we usually view conflict. He states that the enemy doesn't actually fight you the hardest at the starting line.
Which completely subverts our standard operating assumptions. We naturally expect the heaviest resistance the exact moment we declare a new goal or a new season of faith.
But the logic of the sermon makes perfect sense when you break it down.
Yeah.
The enemy fights you hardest in the middle because he knows exactly how close you are to the breakthrough.
Right, you're a threat now.
Exactly. At the beginning, you were unproven. But now, you've gained experience. You've built momentum. You have sunk costs in this journey. So the opposition shifts its strategy. It's no longer trying to prevent you from starting. It's executing a highly targeted campaign to force you to quit right before the finish line.
And the mechanism used for this campaign is what makes it so insidious. It's the creation of illusions.
Illusions.
Yeah, it's pure psychological warfare designed to literally rename your progress as failure. The goal isn't necessarily to destroy you outright, but to drain your endurance so thoroughly that you self-sabotage and abandon the project.
And the examples Pastor West gives for these illusions are so frustratingly relatable.
Yep.
It's not usually some grandiose supernatural attack. It's the mundane things that just grind your gears.
The daily friction.
Right. It's going to the mailbox and finding a fake late notice for a bill for a fact you already paid. It's getting threatened with a sudden wage garnishment from an obscure administrative error that happened like 20 years ago.
Oh, that is the worst.
Or it's an absolute avalanche of scam calls flooding your phone the very week you decide to focus on your mental health.
The classic scenario presented in the sermon is almost a universal experience. The very weekend, you make a firm internal commitment to take your family to church every Sunday, and suddenly the traffic on the interstate is worse than it's been in a decade.
Every single time.
Or the car battery inexplicably dies. Or a massive argument breaks out in the kitchen, right as everyone is putting their coats on.
It's never a coincidence, is it? It's always a highly specific friction occurring the exact moment you try to step into that new identity. And the danger, as the sermon points out, is that our modern, rational brains want to brush these off as mere bad luck.
Right.
But Pastor West is urging the listener to identify the pattern. These are targeted illusions designed to make you weary in your well-doing. They are deployed to make the maintenance phase of your journey feel so incredibly costly, so thoroughly exhausting, that you throw your hands up and say, it's just not worth it.
So how do you defend against a psychological drain that is that relentless?
Right, what's the strategy?
Well, the source material argues that the only defense is transitioning from a flesh-led life to a spirit-led life. Let's define the difference, because it's absolutely vital.
Okay.
If you are led by your flesh, meaning you are primarily driven by your immediate emotions, your comfort, and that need for a dopamine hit, you are going to quit the minute the traffic gets bad. Your emotions will calculate the friction and tell you to turn the car around.
That makes sense.
But being spirit-led means operating on a much deeper frequency of commitment. It means your actions are dictated by your covenant, not your convenience.
And when you manage to operate on that frequency, the results aren't just internal. They become visibly stunning to the people around you.
They really do.
Pastor West shared this remarkable personal anecdote about his own garden. He talked about his knockout roses and how people in the neighborhood used to actually stop and ask him how his roses were vividly blooming in the dead of winter.
Yeah, which shouldn't be happening.
Exactly. He didn't have some proprietary chemical fertilizer or a secret gardening technique. He attributed that bizarre, out-of-season growth entirely to God's unexplainable favor. Because he remained faithful and consistent in the hidden, unglamorous parts of his life, there was a visible, undeniable difference between his yard and the dormant environment surrounding it.
The winter roses are an incredibly potent metaphor. They represent a life that is thriving in a season where every external indicator says you should be dormant, failing, or retreating.
Yeah.
It is the visual, physical proof of a spirit-led life, defying the natural statistical odds of the middle phase.
So what does this all mean for us on like a random Tuesday afternoon when the illusions are piling up and we are just completely physically and mentally drained?
Yeah, the real-world application.
Right, because I struggle with this all the time. My logic tells me that if I'm doing all the right things, if I'm being spirit-led and fighting off the enemy's illusions, I should feel energized. Doing good should theoretically make me feel good.
Sure, that's the expectation.
So when I'm exhausted, I immediately internalize that fatigue as a moral failure. I think, oh, my faith just isn't strong enough.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, which really serves as a foundational pillar for this entire message. Let us not be weary in well-doing.
Okay.
Pastor West uses this scripture to dismantle that exact toxic misconception. We naturally equate weariness with weakness.
Right, we feel incredibly guilty for being exhausted.
But the sermon reframes this entirely. Weariness does not mean you are weak. Weariness simply means you have been on the battlefield.
No.
It's the biological and emotional evidence that you have been consistently fighting, holding the line, and pushing against immense pressure. I mean, a soldier who returns from the front lines isn't considered weak because they are exhausted.
No, of course not.
They are exhausted precisely because they engaged in the fight.
That is such a liberating reframe. And the sermon doesn't just offer theological comfort, It gives incredibly practical, ground-level advice on how to process that weariness.
Yes, the driveway moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pastor West points out that in the military, when soldiers are battle-weary, command doesn't just tell them to toughen up. They rotate them to the back lines to be refreshed. And then he brings that military strategy right into our driveways.
It's so relatable.
He paints this picture of those days where you've been battling the illusions all day, dealing with a stressful job, financial pressure, difficult people, and you finally pull your car into your driveway. And instead of grabbing your bags and rushing straight inside, you just sit there.
Ah, yeah. It is a profoundly universal, modern experience.
Just sitting in the driver's seat. The engine is off, the radio is off, and you are just staring blankly at the garage door.
Just decompressing.
You're trying to gather the shattered pieces of your sanity before you walk through the front door. Because you know on a very deep level that if you carry that chaotic, weary, battle-stained energy inside, you are going to bleed all over your family.
Taking that deliberate pause in the driveway is an act of supreme spiritual maturity. You aren't denying your exhaustion. You're taking active responsibility for it. You are refusing to let it become collateral damage.
Right.
The sermon points to Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31, which contains the famous promise that they who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. But notice that waiting, in this context, is not a passive state.
It's active.
It is an active posture. The key takeaway is that while weariness is an inevitable byproduct of the middle, remaining weary is a choice. You have to actively choose to sit in that car, shut out the noise of the day, seek the presence of God, and allow your spirit to be refreshed.
Because if you don't,
intentionally refresh yourself, that weariness will curdle into a deep despair that will absolutely convince you to quit.
which brings us perfectly to the ultimate motivation for enduring that weariness and staying in the fight. The sermon transitions into its final phase by exploring a fundamental law of how God, and frankly, the universe itself, operates.
Yes.
It is the inescapable principle of seed time and harvest time. You reap what you sow, but there is a temporal gap between the two.
And this is where Pastor West issues a critical warning that ties the entire message together. Breakthroughs are not random occurrences. God does not operate like a slot machine, haphazardly dispensing blessings.
Right.
There is a meticulously scheduled, appointed time for your harvest, which the text refers to as your due season.
A scheduled breakthrough. I love that concept. It shifts the mindset from wondering if it will ever happen to recognizing there is an itinerary, even if we aren't privy to the exact dates on the calendar.
That's the mechanism at play. But there is a rigid condition attached to that scheduled breakthrough. Yeah. You must still be in position when the season arrives.
There's the catch.
If you allow the illusions to drain you, if you draw back, if you let the weariness convince you to fold and quit in the middle of the process, you will essentially vacate the premises before your delivery arrives.
Oh.
You will miss your own scheduled blessing. You are the one creating the gaps and holes in your own harvest by not maintaining your position.
Pastor West used the analogy of a pregnancy to make this crystal clear. A healthy, natural human pregnancy is a 9-month biological process. You cannot plant the seed, do all the right things for 3 months, and then demand the blessing right then and there, just because you are uncomfortable and impatient.
Biology doesn't work like that.
Right. The biology demands the time. There is a chronological, structural necessity to the waiting. You need patience, but it has to be an enduring, working patience. Your blessing isn't being denied by a withholding God. It literally just isn't due yet. It is still gestating.
The ultimate tragedy of impatience is that you end up forfeiting the compounding interest of your own endurance. To drive this point home, the sermon provides 2 striking visual metaphors that really encapsulate the devastation of quitting in the middle.
Let's hear them.
First, imagine a master builder. He spends months pouring the concrete foundation. He frames all the walls, installs the plumbing, does all the heavy, back-breaking, unglamorous labor. But then the fatigue sets in. He gets weary, drops his hammer, and quits right before it's time to add the roof.
And what happens? Someone else is going to walk onto that job site, hammer on a few shingles, paint the front door, and they're going to get all the glory and the financial reward for building that house. All your foundational sweat equity just bought someone else's success.
It is a devastating forfeiture of reward. And the second metaphor is equally visceral. It's the story of the miner who slaves away deep underground.
Oh, this one is tough.
He is swinging a heavy pickaxe in the dark for months, inhaling dust, finding nothing but worthless dirt. He finally gives up in a state of absolute despair. He drops his tools, turns his back, and walks away forever, completely unaware that he was literally one single foot away from striking a massive, life-changing vein of gold.
It legitimately gives you chills. The idea that your breakthrough, the very thing you've been praying and bleeding for, might just be one more swing of the pickaxe away. Just one more month of therapy, one more week of holding your tongue, one more day of showing up to the job.
Exactly.
And Pastor West brings this entire analysis to its absolute peak by pointing away from our own efforts and pointing toward the ultimate historical and theological example of a finisher. He points to Jesus.
Yes. In the Christian narrative, Jesus is presented not just as a savior, but as the supreme prototype of navigating the agonizing middle to successfully reach a designated finish line.
Right.
Think about the Garden of Gethsemane or the agonizing march to Golgotha. That was the ultimate messy, violent, horrific middle. Despite the immense, incomprehensible physical trauma and the crushing spiritual weight of bearing the sins of the world, Jesus did not call it off midway through the process.
He endured it all.
He endured the entirety of the suffering until he could definitively declare from the cross in John chapter 19, verse 30, "It is finished."
He secured the ultimate victory specifically by completing the agonizing assignment.
And the deep theological implication that the sermon draws here is profound. If believers can find the grit to endure their own individual processes, if they refuse to surrender to the illusions, if they manage their weariness, and if they refuse to quit in the middle of their own trials, they are spiritually promised a share in that exact same victory.
That's powerful.
The sheer power of finishing your course is that it inextricably aligns you with the ultimate finisher.
It completely rearranges how you view the waiting room of life. I mean, we spend so much of our finite energy celebrating the dopamine hits of new beginnings, and we throw massive parades for the clean, polished endings.
We really do.
But as we land the plane on today's discussion, I want you to mull over this final thought. What if the middle, that messy, unglamorous, frustrating, dust-covered, completely invisible middle where you feel like you're failing every single day, what if that is actually the most sacred ground of your entire journey?
That's a beautiful way to frame it.
The starting line just reveals your intentions. The finish line just reveals your results. But the middle is the only place where true, lasting transformation actually happens.
It certainly challenges every listener to stop rushing the process, stop looking for the escape hatch, and start deeply respecting the rigorous development that is happening within the delay.
Well said. And that brings us to the end of today's deep dive. We really want to thank you for joining us for this special Transformation Talks. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an insight.
Absolutely.
Also, we want to invite you to join us live on the Transformation Ministries VB YouTube channel or their Facebook page every single Sunday at 10 a.m. It is a powerful, transformative community to be a part of.
And, if you want to experience the full, unfiltered impact of Pastor West's message for yourself, you can watch replays of this entire sermon, along with an incredible archive of others, right there on the Transformation Ministries YouTube channel.
So the next time you find yourself sitting in your car in the driveway staring blankly at the garage door, feeling like you are swinging a pickaxe in the dark with absolutely no end in sight, remember that the lack of visible progress does not mean you have failed. The delay is just development. You are just halfway there. So don't put down the hammer yet. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.